Hi guys, this is Mark. In this lecture, we will be talking about collections. If your background is in programming, you'll know exactly what I'm talking about because collections are also referred to as arrays or lists, but collections is sort of a general term. If you're new to application development and you're not familiar with the concept of collections, it will be very easy to understand for you. So consider any scalar value like a number or a string, a Boolean value. It doesn't really matter. It's a single value. When you have multiple of them combined or grouped with some sort of logical meaning, that's a collection. So for instance, if you have a shopping cart and that shopping cart has multiple items that the user placed into that shopping cart, that's going to be your collection. When you retrieve something from the database, for instance, cities for a particular country or a list of countries, then you will have that collection of countries. So anytime any kind of data is grouped together logically, that's going to be a collection. And in Codeless, there is a special set of blocks that we have that allow you to work on those collections. And we call it a list. And there's a multiple set of operations that are included in Codeless to work on those lists. So you can create an empty list because a collection can be empty. It still is going to be a special kind of entity in Codeless, an empty or populated with data, still an entity that is identified by a name through a variable or that just sitting, let's say, in a data model. So what you can do is you can add items to that list. You can find the first one, find the last one. You can split it up in any kind of manner that you need to. You can identify a particular item in that list because every single item has a special index. It's sort of like a position. So the very first one has an index of 1, and then the next one is 2, and so on. So if you need to retrieve item in position 3, it's going to be the same thing as retrieving an item at index 3, and that index and that object is actually just returned back to you. Not necessarily object, could be a string, could be a number. It's completely up to you. Collections can contain any kind of data. So we will just jump into UI Builder as we usually do to start exploring lists so you can see exactly how to work with them in Codeless, how to work with them in UI Builder. There will be a couple of examples that I believe will be fairly demonstrative of what kind of things that you can do with collections in Codeless. So see you right in UI Builder. And here we are in UI Builder. The very first thing that I'd like you to do is to create a copy of the page that supports logging. To do this, as you've done it before, assuming that you have followed the lectures in the order as they go. Move the mouse over this area, click New Page. In the Create As, select Fork. In the Source, select the page that is your playground page. Let's call this page Collections page. Click Create. So now we are in our playground, and the idea that I would like to explore to understand how collections work goes like this. We will drag the input component, and we will also drag a button. And I'd like to keep these examples as simple as they can get because the goal is to focus on the actual functionality without overwhelming you guys with actual UI. So what we will do with this interface is the user will be able to type in a value in the input component, click the button, and whatever you type in here will be added to a list, to that collection that will be maintained on our page. And in the logging area, we will continue printing out the contents of that list just so you can see that it is growing with every time you put in a value into the label. So let's get started as far as the setup. Click on the input component, and in the label, let's type in enter a value to add, and click the button and change the label to add to list. Simple as that. Now back to the input component, go to the events and data binding by clicking this icon right here. And in the value logic, let's set up the data binding by mapping the value to a property in the data model called item. So anytime user enters a value into the input component, it will be automatically replicated in the data model in the property named item. Click the button and go to the logic for that button. And in here we have the click event, which is where we'll be adding the logic of adding values to our list. Okay, so now we are in codeless logic, and let's explore just some of the functionality that exists with lists. Under system, you'll see there is a subcategory called lists. Click that. In fact, notice that it has 19 blocks in it. So the list supporting functionality is very, very big. In fact, it is more than any other category that we have here. So click lists, and you'll see that there's quite a few blocks that give you all kinds of functionality that you can do with lists. And let's just go over them very quickly. So in here, you can retrieve an item at a particular index from a list. And this one, you can set an object or an item in that list at a particular position. Here you can create a list with an item, and this could be an object, a string, an integer, and it will be repeated the specified number of times. This block gives you an ability to get the length of a list. This one checks if it has any items in it, which will be equivalent of checking if the length equals 0. This one creates a list with a specified number of items, and these connectors can be customized using this little gear icon. This one creates an empty list, and here you can find the first, or I assume there will be like last and so on, occurrences of an item in a list. In this one, you can add an item to the list. Very convenient. We will be using this one today. In here, you can split that list and get a sublist from specific index to specific index. This one will parse out the text and create a list when your text has a certain delimiter. This one will sort your list. Plug, I don't remember what it is. I will need to look it up. I think it will create a sublist using a specific property. We will get to it when we start learning objects. This one checks if an item exists in a list. This combines two lists together. Filter and map are extremely awesome blocks. When we get to loops, we will be exploring these guys. Here, it gives you an ability to replace an item or remove an item, and we will be exploring these when we get to objects. So as you can see, very, very rich support for all kinds of operations that you would need. And this is for the reason that lists are very dominant in codeless programming or in programming in general. All right, now that you got your review of the blocks that we have in the lists, let's go back to our logic. And in our logic, we have the onClick event. And in here, what we know is that in the data model, there is a value that the user typed in the input component. This one right here. So user types it in here. It ends up in the data model mapped to the property called item. User clicks this button, add to list, and this event is called. So here's what we will need to do. First of all, let's get that value from the data model. And if you go to object and select this one, get property, and the property will be item, and that will be sitting in page data. So this block right here, it's not connected to anything yet, will return us the value that the user typed in into the input component. What we need to do with this value is to add it to our list. Let's go to lists and find the one to add. This will be this guy right here. So we will be adding that value to some list. We don't really have that list. By the way, here's a little tidbit of information with Codeless. As some constructs become long, and this one is not very long, but if you want it to be more compact, select that block, right click, and select external inputs. You see, and then you can do the same thing with the get property. So this becomes a little bit more compact. Completely a matter of preference. Some people like to have it long. Some people like to have it this way. By the way, you can also right-click and say collapse block, and it becomes like super compact. So if your logic becomes very long, and at some point it may get very long, use this collapse functionality to make it very brief. All right, now let's go back to our logic. So in here, what we have is we got the value that the user typed in. This guy returns that value. And then using this block, we're adding it to some list right here, this list. By the way, as when we use this add component, as you can see, it already references that list. So as soon as you dragged it to this, let's call it development stage, then the variable list was automatically created for you. So we already have that list. Are we going to use this variable? Probably not. I don't think so, because we can actually get around this completely. And the way we will get around this is because we will maintain that list in page data. And here's how we are going to do it. Let's go to object and do get property. And let's call this property my list. And that will be in page data. So let's just assume that in page data we have a property called my list that contains our list that will continue accumulating data that is being added to our list through input component. So this will be our list. Let's just do it like this. Let's get rid of this little list. So what happened here is we retrieved the list from page data. Let's just assume it is there, and I will show you how it's going to get in there in the first place. So we got this list, and then we're adding to that list value that is added through input component. So let's just connect it to the click event. So by doing this logic, we already made sure that the data from the input component ended up in the list as an additional item. And let's use our logging function. Go to custom functions. And here's our logging function. By the way, we can change it to external inputs. And let's log the contents of our list as the log message. So the list will be this guy. You see, I just replicated this block right here. So this returns our list, and it also requires page data. Now, if you watched the lecture for variables where I was talking about duplication of logic, we have a good candidate to actually introduce a variable that will contain our list. By the way, that variable was already created right here. So let's just use this set list and assign it to this one. And then in variables, we'll retrieve the list like this. And instead of this guy, let's just also use list. That will be exactly the same functionality. Kind of messed it up a little bit, but that's okay. Let me just fix it all back. All right, perfect. So let me go over this one more time because I want to make sure that you understand it completely as to what's going on. We made the assumption that page data contains a list that is mapped to the my list property. Using this block, we retrieve that list and put it into the list variable. Then, using this block, we're modifying that list by adding the item that is sitting in page data mapped to the item property. I'll just change it to the inline input so that it's all consistent. So this adds the value that is in the input to the list. And then we're just logging the contents of the list. Here's a cool thing that is happening. When we retrieve that list from page data, and now it's sitting in that variable, and we modified that list by adding an item to it. This variable is pointing the list that is still sitting in page data. So when we modified it here through the variable, it will be automatically modified in page data. Let's do one more thing, because when we click that button, the value that it will be in the input will still be there. So we want to clear out that input just so it's ready to accept the next item. And to do this, we will do set property in page data. The property will be item. And we want to set it to the empty string value. Because remember that input component is bound to this property. So when we modify data model, it will immediately update the input component as well. Okay, so this logic is ready, and then there is going to be one more thing that we need to take care of, and specifically it's that assumption that we made that page data contains this my list. Because at this point it was an assumption, but let's make this happen. And to make this happen, what we will do is we'll go back to user interface. We will select our page and click the logic for the page. And then on page enter, which is the logic that is executed every time when the page is loaded, what I did is I clicked the add logic button. And in here, what we will do is we will set up that my list property in page data. And we will pre-create that list by going to lists, and then we'll create empty list. So this sets up that list object in page data at the property my list. And that's exactly what needs to happen for that list to be there. Let's run this page and see what happens. How about we add apples? Click the button. So notice that the list contains apples. How about we add bananas? Click and see now list contains apples, bananas. How about we add oranges? Click. So now the list contains apples, bananas, and oranges. By the way, notice that when we were adding that list to print out and logging, we were just passing that list object. And when it's being printed out, it automatically gets printed out with this nice comma delimited values. So now if we continue adding other products, it just continues to grow, which is pretty cool. So now you see how list can be populated with data. Something else that we could do is, since that list is sitting in page data, we could use it for data binding to visualize these items in a UI component. And in order to do this, if we go to UI Builder, let's drag block into here, and this block will be visually representing our list. Let's change the direction from left to right, add a little bit of a border so it stands out from the rest of the components. And let's add another block to this block, and you will see exactly why I'm doing this. So this is going to be our block. Give it a background color. For example, let's pick something orange. And let's add a also border and give it a border radius of, for example, 50. So we'll make a nice little circle out of that. There you go. And let's add text right into the middle of this circle. Right here. And let's center the content of this circle. There you go. Select this text. Let's make this, change the font size to be a little bit smaller, for example, 12 pixels. Okay, so what I want to do is anytime I enter a value into the input and click the button, I want this block to just keep on growing with these little circles where each circle will represent an item in our collection. How will this work? So first of all, select this main block and change it to dynamic list behavior. This is important because that means that the values for this block are going to be dynamically assigned to it. Then click the logic for the block, and in the dynamic items logic, type in my list. Remember, we're using my list property in page data to store our ever-growing list, the one that will contain apples, oranges, and so on. So this is my list. Now, how do we render data for this text? So select this text, click the logic. And in the content logic, there is really no property to bind because it's going to be a list of string values. So in order to resolve logic, click the add logic. And in here, this block 6 data will actually contain that value that is being added to it. It's just one of those kind of magical things in in Codeless. Now let's just see how it works, because at this point it should just work. Oh, by the way, select this block and let's give it a little bit of a margin, because otherwise they will be sticking to each other. So go to margin and let's say margin of 5 pixels, and you can also do button also 5 pixels. Let's run it and let's start adding our apples, oranges, bananas, and so on. So now as we add items, you see that this list right here, this is in debug, and we have here instant visualization of our items. Now that we have this visualization of our list, our collection, let's add the logic that will allow us to remove an item at a particular index. In order to do this, let's go back to our page design and add a input component and change that the type of that input component to number, because it will be accepting index. Also, you might want to add the margin of about maybe 10 pixels so it's not sticking to our list. So this input, the label will be item to remove. And also let's add a button where then that button will say remove item. And in here for this input, let's set up the data binding. The value will be item to remove. That's the name of the property, that where the index will be stored in page data. And now let's click this button and add the logic to remove an item from our list. Click the add logic for the on click event. And in here, if you go to list, you will grab this, the very first one where it says in list get, and you will see why I'm doing this. If you click on get, select remove, and it automatically becomes the block that can be attached to our on-click event. And here the list that we have, it's a variable, but we can get that list directly from page data. So use this select property. You can grab this list and click delete to get rid of it. Remember, the property name is my list of page data. That returns that list. And we want to remove an item at the index that is sitting in page data for the item to remove property. So that's going to be the number that you type in that other input component. So go to object and do get property. And here it will say item to remove, once again, of page data. So now, as you can see, it becomes kind of this very long block. So we might want to change it to external inputs. That's easier to read. So let's go over this one more time. We get our list using this block right here. And then in this list, we do in this list, remove an item at that index. So this number represents index. By the way, you see there are multiple options here. Specific index, index from and, first, last, random. We want specific index. And that index is the number that is sitting in page data mapped to the item to remove property through data binding. That's all it takes. Once you remove it from the list, everything else will work automatically, because once again of the power of data binding. And let's see how well that works. So we will need to repopulate that list. Let's do our apples and oranges one more time. Apple, oranges, bananas, milk. And remember when I said that items in a list start with index 1, so apples will have index 1, oranges 2, bananas 3. So if, let's say, we want to get rid of oranges. So here we put 2, and oranges should be gone when I click this remove item. Click and see oranges are now gone. Very easy. So single block to remove an item, and then if you use data binding, the rest just happens automatically. I think this is going to be it for this lecture. We looked into creation of an empty list, adding an item to a list, removing an item to from a list, and I encourage you guys to try things out, just explore other blocks. If you run into any problems, please ping us. let us know what you tried, what didn't work. We'll be more than happy to assist you. But for now, thank you for watching this video. I hope you found this useful, and as always, happy codeless coding.